Carol reminded me this book began at Lower Manhattan. When the Taft Terminal opened, I went down to look at it. Now, I had been going to Lower Manhattan my entire life, and Lower Manhattan had been in decline my entire life. When I was in charge of the World Trade Center, I thought, it isn't only rebuilding the World Trade Center, it's how do you reverse the decline of Lower Manhattan? I hadn't been aware of what was going on in Lower Manhattan in 15 years. I simply went to meetings. I went to see people. I had things to do down here. So I was looking at the Taft Terminal and I thought, well, I should look around and see what's happening. I look around. It's thriving. That can't be. I go home. I go on the internet and I look up the facts. In the last 25 years, Lower Manhattan lost 1/4 of its office space. And now there are 9,000 more private sector jobs. My first reaction was, it's not possible. But I'm a trained architect. It took me 5 seconds to say, well, we're using less space per worker. In fact, we were. In 1970, it was 500 square feet per worker in an office building. Today it's 150. I was curious, is this happening anywhere else? The least likely downtown I thought to be thriving was Los Angeles. Same thing in Los Angeles. And as I will show you, there's a reason for all of that. I then began to work on a book to explain why and how downtown was changing. And the first thing that happened is I realized that most people don't know what a downtown is. The heart of the city. I have to stand there?
Yeah.
So we can see.
The video camera.
Oh, absolutely. That's not a problem. So, what is downtown? It's a very small part of the city. In Philadelphia, it occupies 6% of the territory, and it produces 44% of the jobs. And in fact, the downtown is the repository of knowledge and culture. It is the incubator of new ideas, new technology, new ventures. It's where we have museums, like this one, and all kinds of things other than just office buildings. Okay? But it's more than that. Most cities have more than one downtown. Atlanta and Houston have 3 downtowns. The nearest one there is Buckhead. That's the 27th largest downtown in the United States, Buckhead. New York, as you know, has many more than the 3 that you can see on that photograph. The most recent one is Long Island City on that area. But it's Midtown, Lower Manhattan, downtown Brooklyn, and now you have to say Long Island City, Dumbo, and other places which are downtowns. So understanding a downtown means more than one place. I also very quickly came to the conclusion that there were 3 trajectories for downtowns. When I was getting into this field, I had been told by everybody, downtowns are over. They're dying, everybody's moving to the suburbs, we're not going to have downtowns. I thought that was silly, and it was. Well, one of the things that did happen is that there are downtowns in the United States that got into trouble and they're still struggling. Bridgeport and Buffalo and St. Louis, and incidentally, Detroit. I took a trip to Detroit because I didn't believe all the hype. How do you go from a population of 1,850,000 to 760,000 and fill up all the buildings that used to be occupied in downtown? So I flew to Detroit to verify this. I arrived in the evening on Thursday. At 9:30 in the morning on Friday, I got on the People Mover. As you must know, I take all these photographs. They're all mine. And I wanted to see the downtown from the elevated subway and then go. When I got on, I decided I'd time how long it took. It takes 20 minutes to make the complete story. In those 20 minutes, 3 people got on and off, 2 of whom were policemen. To give you a sense of proportion, Buckhead, which I just showed you, has a population of 12,500 downtown residents. Lower Manhattan is more than 60,000 now. And it has 10 department stores. Downtown Detroit has 5,000 residents and no department stores. And it was the home of the second largest department store in the world, Hudson's, when I was growing up. And if you look, the population of Detroit has been declining. And these are photographs I took looking to the Renaissance Plaza, which is what I checked into. This is 2001, that's 2017. Yes, it's true. Dan Gilbert, the owner of Quicken Loans, moved his company downtown, is buying up lots of buildings and trying to fill them up. Even better, they have created a business improvement district that's doing everything right. But the market doesn't exist, and it will take a while. Maybe they can bring it back, but I'm dubious. The second, what happens? The second trajectory are the downtowns that never stop growing. This is downtown Dallas. This is actually the area called Uptown. On the top, 1989, that's a hotel here that I stayed at, and it's designed by Philip Johnson. There you see it again in 2009. That's 20 years later. Look at the difference. This is what it looks like more or less now. This is 2017. Amazing. But it's not alone. San Jose has been growing. Houston has been growing. There are other downtowns that have been growing. So that's the second trajectory. The third trajectory is resurgence. This is F. Scott Fitzgerald writing about Manhattan and saying that Lower Manhattan, which in 1929 had experienced the worst Wall Street disaster in history, quote, had all the iridescence of the beginning of the world. And he confessed that he had erroneously thought there were no second acts in American lives. But in fact, he recognized there certainly was a second act for New York City, meaning Lower Manhattan, where the crash had occurred. And in fact, there have been many more acts. Let me show you what I mean. That's 1970. 823 residents in Lower Manhattan, 400,000 jobs. That's not my photograph. That's 9/11. After that, there are 23,000 residents because we'd already been locating people in Lower Manhattan, and 224,000 jobs. By 2016, 61,000 residents and 233,000 jobs. So you have a resurgent Lower Manhattan. And it's not only Lower Manhattan. So why are these downtowns changing? That's what I spend most of my time trying to figure out. The first thing is changes in technology. I didn't expect that this was going to be as significant, and I will show you how significant it is because it turned out to be the single most important. Personal computers and the internet. The internet begins in 1990. That just happens to be the same point at which all of these declining downtowns reverse course, the ones that are resurgent. It's not the only thing that happens then. It's about that time that crime begins to decrease for whatever reason. And the third thing that gets proliferated across the United States, I was prepared for. It was the creation of business improvement districts. We now have 1,400 of them. I will explain about that shortly. In addition to that, we changed the way we ship goods in and out of our country. We used to ship goods in cartons and crates, and we moved them to places that were stored near manufacturing plants and warehouses. When we shifted to containers, the container port, whether it's the container is coming by rail or coming by truck or coming by boat, requires a parking area of 30 acres for each of these vehicles. That is to take off all the goods. That doesn't work in a downtown. Places like Fisherman's Wharf in San Francisco lost all of the shipping to Oakland. And of course, at the same time, all of the warehouses and the factories no longer needed to be there. They needed to be near the highways. Ghirardelli Square being a typical example of the shift. That was a chocolate company. It's not anymore. So that is a second set of changes. I mean, the first set of changes. The second is transportation. We now ship by truck rather than by rail. In 1920, we shipped by rail. It makes a big difference. And when you shift the container operation away from the downtown, you have to close some of the rail yards. And that becomes a critical element for that, as well as the beginning of the investment in highways and the investment in mass transit. And I'm going to go into detail in each of these things. The third set of changes that we experience are changes in population. That people forget about, but they're important. We don't live the same way as we did before. Take a look just at office buildings. WeWork didn't exist in 1970. The kind of office space that are now tech companies and so on, startups, didn't exist. And therefore, you have a different population that's downtown. Immigration. That's the single most important thing. Go to 32nd Street between 5th Avenue and 6th Avenue, and you will see signs in Korean. I will tell you, I was so interested in this. San Jose has the most of these immigrants. I decided I needed to illustrate in the book a downtown that had been changed by immigration. I've been to this city half a dozen times. I had never been to Little Havana. I flew to Miami. You walk in Little Havana, you know without the immigrants, that would not exist that way. The third thing is we have other kinds of parts of our lives. We don't live the same way. And as I said before, we have a decline in crime. And finally, there are changes in lifestyle. City bike is an example of what I'm talking about. But we now live in a different way, and I'm going to talk about that as well, and much more active recreation. Oops, I'm sorry, I keep going now. That's the impact of Google. If you go from the average space per worker from 500 to 150, you don't need all the Class B office space. Well, what happens is very obvious. And in Lower Manhattan, you can see it. All of the things that you see in these darker colors are buildings that have either been renovated or newly constructed after 9/11. And they are Class B spaces that are now being used for residences. No wonder things have changed. Lower Manhattan goes from 800 some odd residents to 61,000. The number of hotel rooms goes from 2,000 to nearly 8,000. The office space goes down, on the other hand. And that means a different kind of downtown. Transportation is part of this as well. There are cities that have invested in a major way in new and improved transportation systems. New York City is not one. But we are either the beneficiaries or the losers, I would say, of the shipping by containers. This gives you an idea of what I meant when I said you need a lot of backup space for each container ship that comes in, whether it's by rail or by boat. You can't afford that downtown. No wonder Piers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 in Brooklyn are no longer used for freight movement. It also allowed the city administration to turn it into the Brooklyn Bridge Park in the last decade. That's a remarkable change, made possible by the change in shipping. And it's not only reuse for parks. It can be used for many other things. Baltimore is a very clever city in terms of investing in this change in shipping as a device for reviving its downtown. This is 1950 Baltimore. The shipping is not going to be able to be done here any longer. They were very clever. They decided they would move all of that 2 miles out into Chesapeake Bay and open up all that property for reuse. And the reuse is called Harbor Place over here. This is all new kinds of things. It's sports facilities, convention center, shopping malls, museums, hospital space, an aquarium, residences, all happening and changing the character of the downtown. If you look here, the Inner Harbor, this is the shopping facility that was built as a copy of in Boston.
Faneuil Hall.
Faneuil Hall, exactly. By James Rouse, who was the developer of Faneuil Hall, the shopping facility there, and was the biggest developer in Baltimore. These are other buildings that happen here, including the aquarium. This is the convention center. These are sports facilities. Everything in black is new construction. That is a huge impact. And so Baltimore has a thriving mixed-use downtown, and it has still problems in the rest of the city. The fact that you have a functioning downtown does not mean you've solved all your problems. It means that you have a functioning downtown. The other thing that happens is that the rail yards are no longer necessary. Chicago had 2 rail yards, Central Station and Dearborn Station, and they went out of use. Central Station in 1989 and Dearborn Station earlier in 1976. This is Central Station over here and Dearborn Station over there. That's what's being built on top. If you look, Central Station has more than 6,000 residents, 3,500 hotel rooms. Dearborn Station has almost 9,000 school, shopping facilities, and the impact of transforming those rail yards, covering them over, changing it, is huge. The same kind of map that we made for Lower Manhattan, I made for this earlier. 75 new apartment buildings in the surrounding area. That's a big change. And if you've been noticing, in all these cases, we are going from a single function business district that used to go to sleep at 6 o'clock on Friday afternoon and awaken at 6 o'clock in the morning on Monday to a high-density mixed-use downtown. That's a very different kind of place. Interstate highways are having the same kind of effect. Obviously, we all grew up in a period of time when people used these interstate highways to drive to cheaper sites that had single-family houses with backyards, and also were cheaper. So people moved out of the city. They thought they had better schools. They didn't have to pay the same high taxes. Well, that worked for a while. It also attracted all of the manufacturing away from the multi-story buildings. The result being that the loft and manufacturing buildings were vacated, and huge areas of the suburbs were covered with trucking and shipping and warehouses. All that moved out of the city. The first American city to really have reacted to this is New York. This is Soho in 1987. Those used to be factories and warehouses that were in use. We all know that the artists by then had moved in, and they were being followed by boutiques and then by luxury housing. This is not long afterwards. This is 1998. It's 11 years after. It's a huge change. Today, this is a very expensive residential neighborhood. That's part of the result of the changes in transportation and in warehousing and manufacturing locations. The cleverest of the cities to deal with all of this, I think, is Denver. Denver in 1980 created a pedestrianized street called 16th Street. They got rid of the automobiles and they put in a free bus that went up and down. And as you will see, there are a lot of important facilities that are right off 16th Street. 21st century, they had a referendum, and all the suburban counties in the metropolitan area and this downtown voted a half a cent sales tax to pay for the creation of a light rail system. So we now have a light rail system that goes from all the suburbs right downtown and also from the airport downtown. When you get to downtown, this is what 16th Street looked like in 1955. This is 2011. By then, it was 30 years old. Entertainers, people can play at the piano, there are vendors, of course. This is where everything happens. But look at what's located along it. Coors Field, the Performing Arts Center, the Convention Center, the Civic Center, which is both the City Hall and the State Capitol. And virtually everything is within walking distance of 16th Street. So you can go from the suburbs downtown and go to your office by getting on the free bus. At lunchtime, you can get on the free bus and go to meet your friends for lunch. And in happy hour, you can do the same thing. That's a diagram of all the things that are in walking distance of 16th Street. That is, without a doubt, the most significant transportation impact on a city, and its change is visible. They also have the University of Denver there, 48,000 students, 130,000 people work downtown, an office inventory downtown of 35 million square feet, and hotels, nearly 10,000 hotel rooms. So this shift from single-function business districts to high-density mixed-use downtown was happening in many places in the United States, some that were continuing to grow, some which became resurgent in the 1990s, and it's a big story. Tourism is another one of those things that has had an impact. If you look at the 10 top tourist destinations in the United States as cities, obviously you can discount Orlando, Anaheim, Las Vegas as very special kinds of tourist destinations. Disney World, for example. But the rest of it, New York, Chicago, Atlanta, Houston, Philadelphia. Look at the amount of tourism in 2017. Take Atlanta, 35 million tourists. That has to have an impact. And it changed the 3 downtowns in Atlanta. This is the 16th Street in Denver. Hard Rock Cafe and the all-night entertainment areas and the bookstores and everything is really right downtown. And the lifestyle changes are evident everywhere. We are now bicycling places. We have reclaimed sections of sidewalk or street for jogging as well as for bicycles. There are things we do outdoors now that we've never thought of doing before. Now, everybody talks about changing downtowns, and they talk about it really in the third person. Downtowns don't change anything. Somebody has to change it. When I started writing the book, people told me, well, millennials are changing downtown. And I would look at them and say, no, I'm afraid not. They don't do anything. They're the result of the changes that somebody else does. Somebody has to buy the Class B office space and convert it into housing. Somebody has to get the idea of turning a conventional office building into a WeWork center. It doesn't just happen. And Baltimore is a good example. That's Baltimore in 1972, before Harbor Place and the Inner Harbor happens. That's what it looks like today. That's the result, in part, of government intervention, but these are all private developers doing this. It didn't just happen. So I ask myself, who are these people? And in my book, I have a chapter on the people changing downtowns and another chapter on the organizations changing downtown. The one I thought I'd amuse you with, because you wouldn't expect it, is a preservationist. Dana Crawford, a woman who graduated from Radcliffe in the mid-1950s, moved, she was originally from Kansas to Denver. She fell in love with the city. She purchased this block that you see there on the left of leftover buildings because she was in love with these 19th century structures. And she renovated it and turned it into something called Larimer Square. When she couldn't get people to rent the ground floor, she invested in the downstairs and put stores there. And it began to take off. Then she convinced the city government and the leadership of Denver to designate as a historic district LoDo, lower downtown, the area with these buildings. I don't have to tell you that it's thriving. How many of you have been to Larimer Square? You know what I'm talking about. It's an amazing thing. One person did this, Dana Crawford. She then invested in other things, but she's one of the players. The other story, I have several about people who do this. The other one I have is a New York family that identified a part of New York that was falling apart. And it's the Relentuses, and they produced Dumbo. Dumbo was unthinkable when I was growing up. Go there. I was there walking around on Saturday. I was blown away by the number of people that are there. Anyway, then we have organizations. As I explained before, the most important are the business improvement districts. There are now 1,400 of them. What had happened was that at the end of the Second World War, there was a demand for increased public services in every city. And every city council said the same thing: we don't have the money. Of course, they all had the money. And they all appropriated the money for their constituents, which is what you'd expect them to do. Downtown business districts had no constituents. They didn't have any voters there. So, quite naturally, the local government began to withdraw the money from servicing the business district and services instead the neighborhoods. Eventually, there was a revolt. The businesses that were located downtown, the property owners, said, if you're not going to provide the services, we will pay for the services. And it began actually in Toronto in 1970, but by 1990, they began to proliferate. New York City's first example is Bryant Park. The different properties around Bryant Park pay a surcharge collected by the city, part of their real estate tax. They turn it over to an entity which is run by the people from downtown, of, by, and for the people. And they produce all of the things. Philadelphia is perhaps the most successful single large-scale downtown business improvement district. This is the budget for Center City, Philadelphia, which is quite large, basically from river to river. This is Market Street, this is City Hall. We're talking about a budget of some $15 million that go to street cleaning, street sweeping. These are the kinds of things. Some of these are photographs of BIDs in New York. Some of them are Philadelphia. But it's a security operation, a information operation, it's sidewalk cleaning, it's collecting all of the newspapers into a single container, it's wayfinding maps, and it's sidewalk sweeping. And that makes a big difference. People are willing to go downtown because it's safe, clean, and attractive. And that is the slogan that many of these BIDs use, particularly downtown Philadelphia. It's made all the difference. We have more than 60 of them in New York City. The smallest one is the Diamond District between 5th and 6th Avenue. But go to the outer boroughs and they perform very important functions. So I asked myself, what should we be doing to change downtowns for the better? In my last book, not this one, What Makes a Great City, I argue that a great city is the product of a great public realm. And it's a great public realm because that's what brings people downtown. And you want to attract people downtown and keep them coming. So I thought, well, what's an example of a major investment in improving the public realm that has changed a downtown? Dallas decided at the beginning of the 21st century to take this highway, which was depressed, and cover it over and put a park on top. And that district, on the other side there, was an increasingly popular area called Uptown. The area in the foreground was going to be the Arts District. It is, in fact, where the Opera House is, where the Symphony Hall is, where the Sculpture Museum is, where the Dallas Museum of Fine Art is, but separated from the residential area. This is the highway, and there you can see the beginnings of the park that they were going to put on top of the Woodlawn Lodge's freeway. It's called Clyde Warren Park. Not only did they raise the money to make this happen, this is not a federal project or just a federal and state project. It's mostly local mercenary organizations of one sort or another. They raised $50 million to program and maintain this new park. So this is the plan, and it has what I would say you need, something for everybody. Little children. I went there because one of my students at Yale, in class, I asked everybody to bring in their favorite project in their hometown. He brought this in. I had never heard of it. This was 2 years ago. And so on Black Friday, that's the day after Thanksgiving, I checked into the Philip Johnson Hotel and walked to Clyde Warren Park. It was teeming with people. Rich people, poor people, Hispanic people, white people, black people, all kinds of people, children, and the age of everybody. I haven't seen anything like this. Well, this being the prime retail day of the United States, I decided to go to Neiman Marcus and see who was there. Nobody was at Neiman Marcus, but there were people at the park. And you can see all these things. $50 million to program and maintain what's essentially 3 blocks. That's what it looks like. Oh, those of you like me who think planning is about public investment to generate a widespread and sustained private market reaction. Look at the cranes. And that's just some of them. That's what's all around this park. The highway continues over there. The park is on the right-hand side. It's an amazing impact. And it is now tied together, the residential portion right near downtown, with the cultural center of downtown. So you can make investments that will help to make a thriving downtown, but it has to be a mixed-use, high-density one. It can't be a single-function business district. Here again is the comparison. That's the hotel I stayed at. I can't see the date of this photograph. Anyway, this is, oh, I see. 1989, 2009. There's the hotel. This is the Symphony Hall. That's the new Opera House, which is by Norman Foster. This is by I.M. Pei. And the last time I was there, that's what I saw. There's the highway. The further to the right is the section of the highway that was covered over by the park. It's amazing. So I would ask myself, what do you have to do to make it a great downtown and keep it? You need people and organizations who are continually working to improve downtown. We have been doing that in New York, in Times Square, for half a century. In 1968, we created the Theater Development Fund, TKTF. In 1969, a special theater zoning district, which produced, with bonuses, the first 5 new theaters in New York since the Depression. Between 1980 and 2000, we spent a lot of time and effort, often incorrectly, to redevelop 42nd Street. But we did it. In 1988, we did what I think was the most important thing. We required illuminated signage. You need to have 50 linear feet for every 1,000 square feet of lot area if you are going to redo a building or build something new. Not surprising that we have a very illuminated Times Square. It was illuminated when I was 6 years old. It's more illuminated now. The Times Square Alliance was started in 1992. The BID that's in charge. So this is why I said 1990 is the beginning of the changeover. TKTS, the staircase, 1999, and because of Jeanette Sadiq-Khan, the pedestrianization, and Tim Tompkins, the head of the bid, the Broadway has been closed, and we have 7th Avenue for traffic. We keep making improvements. I think we will keep making improvements. So that's my story. That's what is in the heart of the city. And I urge you, get the book and read about it, whether it's about what's going on in Houston, Dallas, Miami, or San Francisco, or New York for that matter. I'd be happy to answer any questions. Yes.
The cities that have turned around their downtowns, what can basket cases do, like Buffalo?
Well, the first thing, the basket cases, Bridgeport is even worse, by the way. All the basket cases are similar in one respect. They lost their market. People moved away. In the case of St. Louis and Buffalo, they moved to the suburbs. People did their shopping closer to home. They didn't stay downtown. We deindustrialized. So Detroit lost a lot of employment, and industrial employment is no longer a major part of employment in the United States. It's certainly not downtown, because you now have interstate highways, so the manufacturing plants left, the warehouses left. Those cities that have been successful have found other ways to attract the market, or they are in locations that, for a variety of reasons, continue to attract and enlarge their market. For example, I go to New Haven once a week to teach. I now walk past a building that on the ground floor doesn't have a retail store. This is Church Street, for those of you who know New Haven. It's the consulate of Ecuador. There is now an Ecuadorian population in Fairhaven. There are Ecuadorian stores there. That's part of the transition that happened between 2000 and 2010. New Haven started to grow again. It started to have new population. There are now new apartment houses there, new hotels. I stayed at a hotel that the brother of one of my students invested in, called the Blake Hotel on High Street. The restaurants were what really began it. But there is an immigrant population and a growing number of people who want to be near the new businesses that are locating in New Haven. That's the secret to the turnaround. It didn't happen in Bridgeport. Bridgeport competes with New Haven and Stanford is a big competitor here. It can't find anything yet that is enough to bring back these people. Detroit is struggling to do this. I don't know enough about Buffalo to tell you, but we all know the factories are not there anymore. St. Louis, they're all in the suburbs. So there are things you can do. If you have a highway, and for example, St. Louis has a highway that is in between the Riverfront Park and the Great Arch and the downtown. That highway is a barrier. If you would cover it over the way they did in Dallas, I think it would make a difference. People would walk directly into the state park. Is that enough? I doubt it. I think they need more than that. Of course, if you've got businesses that will move in, Google, Amazon, look at New York. We have underway this amazing new set of offices. I was in one today on Madison Avenue between 43rd and 44th Street, between Madison and Vanderbilt. This office building was a conventional office building. It is now having the insides taken out. It's going to have a full height atrium, and the floors are all for startups. They are being rented to these companies that are tech companies. And as I said before, the key to a downtown is to incubate the new ideas, the new technology, and that's one of the things you do with this. But you have to redo the office buildings to do that. I don't know if you do this in Detroit whether you're going to get that or not. I really don't. Yes, sir.
In the same vein, the structure that we've had that's changed so much in this country is consolidation of corporations, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
Most cities were famous for a group of entrepreneurs with one outstanding business person in that city who was, if you will, the city father and spearheaded an awful lot of what happened. You're seeing less of that now, in the sense that you have really imaginary institutions who are really doing this, and they may represent that old wealth. And you find in some cities that there are entrepreneurs who are doing it, but there's not enough of them in enough sort of concentration of places to bring about what you're talking about.
I tell a story in the book of a city that did this. They, in fact, had these major corporations and very influential, wealthy figures. It was Pittsburgh. Mm-hmm. Pittsburgh, before the Second World War, was choking on air pollution, flooding, and they invested as a result of the joint effort of the head of the Democratic Party and Mr. Mellon. And the Mellon Bank and the other businessmen who came with them, Alcoa being another one along with it. They redid the waterfront. They invested in highways that ran along the river's edge. They cleared out a park at the base of the triangle, and that was their first effort. The second effort was to get a new set of jobs there. They now have tech companies. They are based on robotics, artificial intelligence, growing out of the university. I didn't expect this. They also have an arts district and a university they put downtown, and they keep working at it. I think there are other cities that try to do the same thing through investment. I would argue, even though the rest of Philadelphia is not doing as well as the downtown, the Center City Philadelphia Business Improvement District does this. They're finding ways to put real money in and promote the city. It's difficult.
Chicago and Philadelphia are pretty much the same. The downtowns are thriving, but you're seeing all the ancillary neighborhoods because of the changes that are taking place.
Chicago is different.
Well, the south side.
It's different. Its politics are radically different.
What about a place like Newark? I mean, it's got fabulous water. It has fabulous location and transportation. Yes, of course, there was a terrible history of the riots and the rest. It's still the largest city in the state.
It's, you know, I'm of mixed opinion about Newark. Its former mayor is running for president. I'm not sure that they changed that much during the time that he was the mayor. They've tried. They need something more. What it is, I don't know. The first set of things they did were urban renewal projects, which, unlike Pittsburgh, they did badly. And I would say, unlike Detroit, there are 2 urban renewal projects, 3 in the United States, that were done by great architects. One particular great architect, Mies Monroe. One of them is in Newark. It's not very good. One of them is in Baltimore. It's Charles Center. Again, 1 building there. But the thing that's a great success is Lafayette Park in Detroit, which is sitting there fully occupied, having not lost any value, mixed income, mixed ethnicity in the middle of a sea of abandoned buildings. It is a great urban renewal project and it's very beautiful. It also has a park and a school. Yes, sir.
What's your opinion of Amazon in Long Island City?
Well, the first thing I would say, I have been looking at and working with Long Island City since I became an adult. I'm involved in many projects there. Rather than comment on what they did, let me tell you what I would have done in their situation. I would not have acquired any property. I would not have required any city approvals. I would not have required any subsidies to Amazon or anybody else. And it can be done. There is a site on the southern side of Long Island City, which is a rail yard on top of the Queens Midtown Tunnel. The MTA owns it. It doesn't pay taxes. The MTA could get it into a joint venture with a developer who would build a building there and rent the space to Amazon, and Amazon rent would then go to the MTA to make improvements to the city subway. And I would have announced that. I would have announced that on the same day by bringing in all the elected public officials and making them part of the announcement. What I will tell you is, we mangle this. I would also say that the people in the neighborhood weren't getting anything from this. I think that's a problem. You know, the far west side, the Hudson Yards got the number 7 subway. And not just for the Hudson Yards, for the whole area. They also got this excuse for park, linear park, the diagonal that goes in there. Could it have been done better? Yes. But they actually gave some things to the far west side, to the other areas. You have to have something that the people around you benefit from. Yeah. And why would you turn down Amazon jobs? I don't know.
Posting jobs.
Well, yeah, but again, the jobs were for the city as a whole. The jobs were not necessarily for the people in Long Island City, which is why we were getting these wonderfully high numbers for the city residents approving the Amazon deal, but you couldn't get some of the local officials to be for it.
So, Alex, to follow up on that, though, the scenarios that you present are either a visionary developer or a preservationist who has enough money and to affect massive change, significant change,
Yeah.
or a good government. But individual participation, community engagement, you know, the other side of planning, which has been ascendant in the last 20 years or so, has not
Well,
figured
first
in
of
your
all,
descriptions.
I would say that we don't have to have downtowns developing because they're a massive effort by an individual or an institution. There are downtowns that continue to grow and to thrive without any of that. I won't say without any of that, because there usually are some examples. But San Jose doesn't have this. San Diego does. As for public participation, I'm a deep believer in this. When I was working to redevelop Lower Manhattan, I made sure that we had a website, a blog, an exhibition at the World Financial Center, meeting with every organization in the area. The plan that came out of the competition, the Libeskind plan, was pretty radical. Did you hear any opposition when it was approved?
They did it in a slightly different way. They put a
Well,
SOM on it, really.
Well, but the point is, there was real public participation. Some of the people in this room actually went to meetings of this sort. It is essential that you have this. You know. There's no way that you can do this any other way. I would have also, on the day that I announced the new Amazon plan, financed the Long Island City partnership to analyze the needs that would be created by the new people and businesses moving into the site, and commission them to analyze that and come up with some proposals. That would have changed their character as well. You can't do this without public participation. But you also can't do it without developers, property owners, institutions. One of the stories that I tell, and because we have a few Yaleys in the audience, is New Haven. In New Haven, the university has invested not just in buildings on the campus where it provides jobs for people in New Haven. And remember, New Haven is a very small city. Yale is 20,000 people in a city of about 125,000. That's a real problem for the university. It can't stand out. So Yale is very conservative in all of these things. It has brought up and fixed up the edges of the university, Broadway, Chapel Street, College Street. These are all places where Yale has put some money. It also provides a subsidy for all the staff that buys a house in the city of New Haven. I've forgotten how much it is. It's total about $25,000 over 10 years. This has been done discreetly. The University of Pennsylvania had the same problem with the surrounding area, but it's different. There are many universities in Philadelphia, and Penn was in an area, West Philadelphia, which was in real trouble, much more than New Haven. They did the opposite. They did it with the biggest splash possible, with the most publicity possible. They involved all of the local merchants in a joint process, and their business improvement district has turned around West Philadelphia. It's a very different way of doing it, but you need these institutions or you need individuals. It's one or the other. Yes, sir.
So maybe this is changing the subject a little bit, but the United States is full of cities of 50 to 100,000. Most, I would say, today with struggling downtowns. Mm-hmm. Is this a completely different story?
No. I tell a few of them in the book. My favorite story in the book is a relatively small city. I do talk about New Haven. It's Cincinnati. Cincinnati in my lifetime was a real problem. Downtown Cincinnati consisted of two pieces. There was the business district, then there was a road, I've forgotten the name of the street, and then something called Over the Rhine. In 1900, Over the Rhine was a German-American neighborhood. It began to decline about that time. By the 1960s, it was a largely African-American poverty zone. I went there for the first time in the 1990s. It was a real problem. Abandoned buildings, buildings collapsing, vagrants on the street, a large African-American population. By then it was entirely African-American. And in the first part of the 21st century, there was a famous race riot for 4 days. And I thought it could never come back. It was one of the other places I went besides Detroit because I didn't believe the hoopla. I was wrong. After the riots, the mayor went to Procter & Gamble and the other large corporations downtown and said, I want you to invest with us to create a community development corporation. And they did. The Community Development Corporation then began to buy up buildings in Over the Rhine. And they were very clever. This was about 2007 that they were beginning to operate. They also saw they had an opera house, a theater, a park, a lot of institutions that were falling apart. They began to invest in. The thing that they did, which was incredibly clever, was they purchased the first buildings in Over the Rhine, which were either abandoned or run down, and had retailers on the ground floor, but specific retailers. Liquor stores and bars. They vacated the liquor stores and bars, and the vagrants disappeared. They fixed up these buildings, re-tenanted them, and they have been doing this for the last 15 years. And I was in Over the Rhine a year and a half ago. It is thriving. And on the main shopping street, you can see the big sign, I think it's Macy's, the downtown department store. It has cultural events going on in the Opera House. It has now 2 parks, not one. One of the parks, they excavated the basement, the underground, and they have a parking garage there. That's also where the Opera House and the theater are. It's a fascinating story. There are other stories like this with small downtowns, New Haven being one of them. It's very difficult. Some of them will work easily and some of them won't. And I will tell you that you have to treat each one of them differently because not only is the economy different, the population is different, and the politics are different. Yes?
A couple of comments following up on some earlier questions. I happen to have been in Newark on Sunday, and granted it was a beautiful, warm, sunny day. And I've been going to New York a fair amount because I was teaching a student at Columbia, which is on the New York site. But I feel very optimistic about New York. There's things happening there now. I have 2 sets of friends who recently moved downtown Newark. One, an architecture teacher at MJT, and his wife sold their house out in the suburbs, moving into one of a beautiful architectural office building and converted it into apartments. Another architect works in Manhattan. He and his husband just bought a beautiful house in Newark for peanuts, and he commutes 20 minutes on the rail. And we started to see some businesses, Whole Foods, and stuff in downtown New York.
And it wouldn't surprise me if it did.
I think it's next Newark after Hoboken, which is the city. Tremendous buildings.
They could guess.
And then after from the first question, when the gentleman used Buffalo as a basket case, just last week I listened to a very moving piece on NPR about state New York cities that have been shrinking in population. And Buffalo and Utica were the ones that they were talking about. And their engines for revival were immigration and refugees. And I think one or both of the mayors of Utica and Buffalo were Republicans. And they were lobbying Washington to increase the number of refugees in particular that were coming in. And the mayor of Buffalo was citing how this totally derelict stretch of the city had been totally revitalized by refugees and immigrants from Ethiopia and Somalia.
Wow.
Businesses, restaurants, everything happening. And there are a lot more. They're actually devising programs to lure refugees and immigrants from Kansas and Iowa and states where they're diminishing services to immigrants by advertising the fact that in upstate New York, cities are offering free English classes, there's no limit on how long you can, all these incentives because they actually need to reverse the population decline. And they even have local businesses that can't hire.
I wish I had known that when I was writing the book, rather than to go to Miami.
Yeah, that story is.
But it's a story that goes back 50 years.
Yeah, it's a 50-year-old story. But I was amazed by these stories, though. I mean, New York City was a third immigrants,
Absolutely.
in the beginning.
Absolutely. I believe that the Immigration Act of '65 is the single most important thing for cities that has been done by the Congress. Yeah. And you go to Queens and you can see why, what it is. We have enormous immigrant population.
But New York.
But, yeah.
That's a good
Yes.
question. Just going back to Cincinnati, maybe you'll tell me to buy the book, but I was just curious. You talked about how the neighborhood was almost entirely African American back in 2001 when they had the riots. What's happened since all of this sort of rehabilitation of the area in terms of the demographics of the people living there? Because I guess the point that the question I have is, it's great that the neighborhoods are improving, but I'm just wondering, is there opportunity for everybody living in the city to sort of take advantage or be part of this improvement in the neighborhood, or are people getting pushed out of the city?
It's a very important question you asked. When I started looking at it, the first book I read was totally critical of what was going on. It was by a welfare rights worker who thought that this was gentrifying the neighborhood, and she was absolutely opposed to all of this. So far as I can tell at the moment, the area is still majority African American, but barely. And it's clearly gentrifying. Some of the renovated apartments have low-income housing tax credits, but they were not trying to deal with that problem. They were. I don't know whether this is going to continue. It's a mixed-use population, but majority black. It's a problem we have to deal with in every case where it's going to occur, and there are many. And without subsidies, you can't deal with persons of low income. You simply cannot provide the housing any other way, and we are not providing those subsidies. The worst example of this is right here in New York. We have a government that owns housing for 400,000 residents and will not spend enough to even repair the roofs. And all I can tell you is when Mayor LaGuardia created the first housing authority in the United States in 1934, there was a commitment made. The governments of New York, the last 3 administrations, believe that this is a federal problem, and the federal government isn't going to put up any money. They weren't, and they exacerbated the situation. This is a problem everywhere. And it's a problem that cannot be solved without subsidies, and we're going to have to appropriate that money. Getting the political approval for that, I'll grant you, is very difficult.
Right.
think of Pruitt-Igoe when you're talking about architects.
Well, the thing about Pruitt-Igoe, to put you into a little perspective, it won all kinds of design awards when it was built. It was designed by the same Minoru Yamasaki who designed the World Trade Center. And if you've seen the magnificent movie they did, people who moved in when it was new, but then this was an extraordinary event. I would argue all of this is about inadequate maintenance for many reasons and not spending money on repairs, which any property owner would do because otherwise their property would lose its value.
Alex, I think this is a perfect segue to make a connection to the future talks that we're going to have in connection with housing density, and to say that we have a reception here, so you can still continue to ask Alex your individual questions while you have a glass of wine or water. So let me just say that the exhibition that you see around you, called Housing Density, addresses the ideas of how cities get built by both private and public investment. And we have a lecture series that's going to begin on June 11th with a book that I can hold up right here because I have it, by Sandy Taylor, a brand new book called The Decorated Tenement. So come back on June 11th. And then on the 13th, 2 days later on June 13th, and then for two other segments of the series in July, where Nicholas Bloom, who is the guest curator and urban historian, who has studied Nietzsche and written a book about Nietzsche called Public Housing That Worked. So he's a fan and an advocate of public housing. And
As am I.
As in fact, his father was the head of public housing in St. Louis, and Pruitt-Igoe was under his watch. So he has a deep perspective on that material. So we're going to look at private investments in high-rise housing like Tudor City and London Terrace will be the next lecture on the 13th. And then Nick Bloom looking at Nietzsche in July, and then a look at the origins of Nietzsche to put that 1934 generation, like Frederick Ackerman, who's in that case over there, in perspective when the investment in public housing and the opportunity by the Depression to use federal funds in order to create housing for working class people that couldn't be built except with subsidies begins its legacy and its journey, its decline, its rise and its decline in New York. So all of those contemporary issues that Alex was just alluding to is something that we're going to continue to address in the lectures, and I invite you to look around the exhibition still tonight and to come back so that we can continue the downtown, but also the residential, the complementary residential developments that are so important to our cities.
Thank you all very much.
Familiar faces. I'm Carol Willis. I'm the founder, director, and curator of the museum. Is there anybody who's here for the first time tonight? No, good. Regulars. Yeah. So I certainly don't need to say anything about myself, and I will introduce Alex through some of his publications. I guess you're all here because you know Alex or have heard about him, and over the years in Lower Manhattan, or then maybe to one of his book talks before, because I think this is your fourth book talk at the museum. And it seems like it's one every year, but I checked the pub dates, and it's like, it takes you 3 years to do a book. What's wrong with you, Alex? It really does seem like it's just last fall or last spring that we were having the third book in the series, which isn't even this one, it was the planning game that we did at that point. But we still happen to have a few copies of this one from public parks. So from parks to downtown centers, all aspects of the city are the subject of the analysis and admiration and affection of Alex Garvin. Alex, a lot of you know, and some of you may even know him as a professor at Yale for X number of years. 53 years, teaching urban studies issues from the perspective of design, development, building, economics, from the whole kind of package of topics that are necessary in order to understand cities properly. And for the many first years that I knew Alex, and this is going back like probably 30 years anyway, he was working on his magnum opus, which is the American City, What Works, What Doesn't, which has been now in second or multiple editions in this, in third editions, third rewrite, third addition to the editions. And so I thought it took Alex a long time to write a book, but then he's fired away at these various topics every 3 years or so with yet another kind of variation of theme and variations on the topic, and this one is the heart of the city, downtowns. And downtown, and New York's downtown, and downtown cities around the world, and Alex keeps finding excuses to go back to his favorite cities in order to, you know, kind of walk the streets, sit in the cafes, and analyze them, and their public spaces in particular. But his role in Lower Manhattan and our downtown was, of course, very consequential after 9/11, when he became the vice president for development, for planning, for the World Trade Center rebuilding project and site. And it was there that he played a very significant role in bringing people together, in creating a kind of strategy to bring better design to that particular site, but his ambition was to do this much more broadly throughout Lower Manhattan. And that story of politics and planning is something that he's both written about and he's bet my ear about when I ask him many questions. And we benefited in our installation, which is almost completely launched in our South Gallery, where we look at a timeline of the rebuilding at ground zero. And to have somebody who lived that experience and to look through that kind of narrative where you try to take something as complicated but as concentrated a site as ground zero and its location in Lower Manhattan is certainly challenging. And there's nobody better in order to put those things in perspective and then to widen the lens of that perspective as well as Alex Garvin. So let me just let Alex take over.
Thank you.